You don't belong on our private island, his mistress sneered while boarding the helicopter. He embraced her as if I didn't exist. Hours later, when they touched down on the island shore, security was waiting, only to announce the paradise now belonged to someone they never expected. I knew my life was over the moment I saw those red designer heels by our front door. Not my heels. I hadn't owned anything that expensive since I started funding Sebastian's dreams. These belonged to someone else, someone who was currently in my bedroom with my boyfriend of 5 years, their laughter floating through the thin walls like poison. I sat in my rusted Honda outside our apartment building for 3 hours that morning, watching, waiting, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. When they finally emerged, Sebastian didn't even check if my car was in its usual spot. He was too busy adjusting Ella's dress strap, the same gesture he used to do for me before his investment meetings became more important than our relationship. Before we dive deeper into my story, if you believe women deserve recognition for the sacrifices they make, please consider subscribing. It helps others find these important stories. Now let me tell you what happened next. The strange thing about seeing your world collapse is how quiet it can be. No dramatic music, no thunder in the distance. Just me, sitting in a car that needed new brakes I couldn't afford, watching the man I'd sacrificed everything for treat another woman the way he'd once treated me. Ella wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than I made in a month at Marina's diner. Her hair fell in those perfect waves that only money can buy, and when she laughed at something Sebastian whispered, I recognized the confidence of a woman who'd never had to count change for gas money. After they drove away in Sebastian's BMW, the one I'd co-signed for last year, I finally went inside. Our apartment felt different, violated. The bed was made but not the way I made it. The pillows were wrong. There was a wine glass in the sink with lipstick marks that weren't mine. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for 20 minutes, unable to enter, unable to leave. This was supposed to be our sanctuary, the place where we planned our future while eating takeout on mismatched plates. Now it was just another space where I didn't belong. That evening I returned to Marina's diner for my shift, 3 hours late and still in shock. Marina took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. She'd owned this place for 30 years and had seen enough heartbreak to recognize it from across the room. The diner sat right on the waterfront, a greasy little sanctuary that served fishermen at dawn and tourists at noon. I'd been working there for 3 years, my hands growing raw from the constant exposure to hot water and harsh chemicals, my feet aching in shoes I'd worn so long the soles had molded to the shape of my exhaustion. Between orders, my phone buzzed with texts from Sebastian. Not apologies or explanations, just his usual requests. Investment dinner tonight, need $500 transferred. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I responded the way I always did, transferring money I didn't have from a credit card that was nearly maxed out. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over while my mind tried to process the betrayal. The anniversary I'd been planning for had been 2 days away. 5 years together, and I'd secretly bought ingredients to make his favorite meal, the one his mother used to make before she passed. I'd even traded my Saturday night shift with Marcy, giving up the best tips of the week because Sebastian had promised something special. He'd been talking about it for weeks, building it up, saying he wanted to celebrate everything we'd built together. I'd pressed his best suit that morning, the Italian one I'd bought him for Christmas with 3 months of saved tips, making sure the creases were perfect for whatever surprise he had planned. Around 9 that night, Uncle Matthew walked into the diner. I hadn't seen him in 7 years, not since I'd chosen Sebastian over my family's warnings. Matthew Caldwell was my mother's older brother, a man who'd built his fortune in maritime shipping and never let anyone forget it. He moved through the world like he owned it, which in some ways he did. His presence in Marina's diner was as out of place as a diamond in a coal mine. "Aurora," he said, taking a seat at the counter. His gray eyes studied my face, taking in the exhaustion I'd worn for so long it had become part of my features. "You look tired." I poured him coffee with shaking hands, trying to summon the pride that had kept me away from family money all these years. "Just a long shift. What brings you here?" I heard Sebastian's been making waves at the country club, talking about big deals, private islands, luxury developments. Matthew's voice was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Interesting, considering his girlfriend is working herself to death in a diner. The words stung because they were true. I'd been funding Sebastian's entire facade, from his membership fees to his business lunches, while I ate leftover soup from the kitchen and mended my uniform with dental floss because I couldn't afford proper thread. "We're building something together," I said, the lie automatic after years of practice. "His success is our success." Matthew reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the counter. "When you're ready to stop paying for someone else's kingdom, call me." "But Aurora," he paused, his expression softening for just a moment. "Don't wait until there's nothing left of you to save." He left a $100 tip for his $3 coffee and walked out, leaving me with his card and a growing awareness that everyone could see what I'd been blind to. I finished my shift in a daze, mechanically serving orders while my mind replayed the morning's discovery. Those red heels by the door. Sebastian's hand on Ella's lower back. The ease with which he'd betrayed everything we'd built. Or rather, everything I'd built while he took credit for it. When I got home that night, Sebastian was already asleep or pretending to be. His phone sat on the nightstand, and for the first time in 5 years I felt the urge to look through it. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I stood in our kitchen holding Uncle Matthew's business card, feeling something cold and calculating begin to form in my chest. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. 3 days passed before I decided to follow him. 3 days of pretending everything was normal, of serving coffee with steady hands while my mind replayed those red heels by the door. Sebastian had mentioned something about a morning meeting at Whitmore Airfield, speaking casually over breakfast as if he hadn't shattered my world. He adjusted his cufflinks, the gold ones I'd saved 6 months to buy, and kissed my forehead with the practiced affection of a man who'd forgotten what real love felt like. Whitmore Airfield sat 40 minutes outside the city, a private facility where corporate executives and wealthy families kept their toys. I'd called in sick to Marina, my voice genuinely hoarse from crying in my car the night before. The drive there felt longer than it was, each mile adding weight to what I was about to do. I parked behind a maintenance building and walked toward the hangars, my body moving on autopilot while my mind screamed at me to turn back. That's when I saw them. Sebastian stood beside a gleaming helicopter, his hand on the small of Ella's back as he helped her navigate the steps in her impractical heels. The morning sun caught her hair, making it shine like something from a commercial, and I watched Sebastian look at her the way he used to look at me when we first met. But it was what he said to the pilot that changed everything. "Beautiful morning to show my fiancé the island," Sebastian announced, his voice carrying across the tarmac. "Solara Island is absolutely stunning this time of year. My private paradise." The words hit differently than the betrayal itself. Solara Island. I knew that name. It had been carved into a wooden plaque in Uncle Matthew's study, the crown jewel of his property empire, passed down through 3 generations of Caldwells. Sebastian was claiming ownership of my uncle's island, spinning lies so bold they took my breath away. I stepped out from behind the hangar before I could think better of it. My sneakers made no sound on the concrete, but Ella saw me first. Her expression shifted from surprise to something else entirely. Amusement, maybe, or satisfaction. She didn't step away from Sebastian. Instead, she moved closer, threading her arm through his with deliberate possessiveness. "Aurora," she said, my name sounding foreign in her mouth. "Sebastian told me you might show up like this." Sebastian's face had gone pale, but he didn't speak. He stood there, trapped between 2 women, and chose silence. Ella filled it for him. "He said you were having trouble accepting the breakup," she continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "That you keep showing up at his events, following him around. He called you his charity case, actually. Said he felt bad about leaving someone so." She paused, looking at my worn jeans and faded jacket, desperate. "But we can't keep enabling this behavior, can we?" The cruelty was calculated, each word chosen for maximum damage. But what hurt more was Sebastian's response. Nothing. He stood there, letting her paint me as some pathetic stalker, neither defending me nor acknowledging 5 years of my life spent building his success. His silence was the final betrayal, worse than the cheating, worse than the lies. "Enjoy the island," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm sure Uncle Matthew would be fascinated to know you're claiming it as yours." Something flickered in Sebastian's eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition that I wasn't as naive as he'd assumed. But Ella was already pulling him toward the helicopter, laughing about something the pilot had said, dismissing me as easily as she'd dismiss a servant. I walked back to my car with measured steps, refusing to run, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But once inside, my hands shook so violently I couldn't get the key in the ignition. That's when I noticed it. Sebastian's phone on the passenger floor, where it must have fallen from his jacket when he'd grabbed his overnight bag from the car earlier. The device felt like fire in my hands. His passcode hadn't changed. Still my birthday, a detail that might have meant something if I hadn't just witnessed him claiming to be engaged to another woman. What I found inside destroyed any remaining delusions I'd harbored. 2 years. The messages with Ella went back 2 years. While I was working double shifts to pay for his MBA graduation dinner, he was texting her about weekend getaways. While I was transferring my savings for his emergency root canal, he was booking hotels with her credit card, promising to pay her back once his situation with me was resolved. The word he used for me wasn't girlfriend or partner. It was situation. The lies went deeper than infidelity. He told Ella he owned 3 restaurants downtown, the ones I'd helped finance but were actually failed ventures. He claimed to have inherited commercial real estate from his grandfather, properties I recognized as belonging to Matthew's portfolio. Every achievement I'd sacrificed for had been inflated into fantasy, a fictional empire built on my very real labor. One message thread made me pull over to vomit on the side of the highway. Once the Solara Island deal closes, he'd written 3 weeks ago, I'll have enough to leave Aurora properly. She deserves something for all her help. Maybe I'll pay off her car. My car. The one I'd bought used and still owed $4,000 on. That was his grand gesture for 5 years of funding his entire life, paying off my decade-old Honda. I sat in Marina's parking lot that night after my shift, Sebastian's phone like evidence of a crime in my passenger seat. The normal choice would be confrontation, throwing his phone at him, demanding answers, making a scene worthy of our destroyed relationship. But normal had gotten me here, broke and betrayed, while he flew to private islands with his real fiancée. The business card in my wallet seemed to pulse with possibility. Uncle Matthew had warned me about men who built kingdoms on borrowed foundations. What he hadn't said was that sometimes those kingdoms needed to be demolished, brick by brick, until nothing remained but truth. I started my car and drove home to pack a bag, not for leaving but for war. Sebastian thought I was weak, desperate, a charity case clinging to false hope. He was about to learn that the woman who'd sacrificed everything for his dreams had been taking notes the entire time. Every receipt, every transfer, every lie was documented in notebooks I'd hidden throughout our apartment, a paper trail I'd kept out of habit from growing up poor, never imagining it would become evidence of the greatest theft of all, the theft of my life. Dawn would come soon, and with it my first move. Uncle Matthew's estate opened its gates at 6 in the morning. I would be there at 5:59, holding Sebastian's phone and the truth about Solara Island. The man I'd loved was gone, if he'd ever existed at all. What remained was a stranger wearing expensive suits I'd bought, claiming properties he'd never owned, building an empire on foundations that were about to crack. The gates of Matthew's estate opened at precisely 6 in the morning, just as I knew they would. The security guard recognized me despite the 7-year absence, his eyes widening at my appearance. Not the confident young woman who'd left to chase love, but someone harder, carrying evidence of betrayal in a designer phone that wasn't mine. Morning fog rolled off the ocean and across Matthew's manicured gardens as I walked the familiar limestone path to the main house. The estate sprawled across 20 acres of prime coastal property, every hedge perfectly trimmed, every stone in its place. This was the life I'd walked away from, choosing Sebastian's promises over family stability. Now I returned not as the prodigal niece seeking forgiveness, but as someone who finally understood that dignity had a price, and I'd been paying it for too long. I found Matthew in his study, exactly where I knew he'd be. He sat behind a mahogany desk that had belonged to my grandfather, reviewing maritime contracts with reading glasses perched on his nose. The room smelled of leather and coffee, morning light streaming through windows that faced the harbor. He looked up when I entered, and something in my face made him set down his pen immediately. Aurora. He stood, studying me with those sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. You look like you haven't slept. I need to show you something. I placed Sebastian's phone on his desk, followed by the notebooks I'd been keeping for years. But first, you should know that Sebastian is claiming he owns Solara Island. The change in Matthew's expression was subtle but devastating. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his fingers stilling on the desk surface. Solara Island had been in the Caldwell family for 3 generations, purchased by my great-grandfather as a wedding gift for his bride. It was more than property, it was legacy. I opened Sebastian's phone and showed Matthew the messages, watching his face darken with each revelation. The fictitious business deals, the borrowed reputation, the casual way Sebastian had appropriated the Caldwell name for his own advancement. When I reached the messages about Solara Island, about Sebastian's plans to show off his private paradise, to Ella, Matthew's controlled fury was palpable. How long has this been going on? His voice remained level, but I knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used before destroying business competitors who'd crossed ethical lines. 2 years that I can prove. Maybe longer. Matthew picked up his phone and made a single call. Harrison, I need you at the estate immediately. Bring your team. He hung up without waiting for confirmation. Harrison Pike was Matthew's private investigator, a former prosecutor who'd transitioned to corporate intelligence. If Sebastian had secrets beyond what I'd found, Harrison would uncover them. Within an hour, the study had transformed into a war room. Harrison arrived with 2 associates and laptops that began dissecting Sebastian's digital footprint with surgical precision. What they found exceeded even my worst assumptions. Sebastian had been using my social security number to secure loans, claiming partnership with Caldwell Enterprises on applications, forging signatures with practiced ease. 3 years of systematic fraud laid out in spreadsheets and documentation that made my stomach turn. He owes almost $200,000 across various creditors, Harrison reported, his voice clinical. All secured using either Aurora's credit or implied association with the Caldwell name. There's also evidence he's been shopping around a business proposal claiming Solara Island as collateral for a development project. Matthew poured himself whiskey despite the early hour, then poured one for me. The burn of expensive alcohol felt appropriate for the moment. We sat in leather chairs that had witnessed decades of family decisions, and I watched my uncle transform from family patriarch to strategic predator. He wants to play owner of Solara Island? Matthew's smile was dangerous. Then let's give him the full experience. The plan formed with elegant simplicity. Matthew would contact the island's staff, instructing them to prepare for Sebastian's arrival. They would treat him like the owner he claimed to be, fulfilling every request while documenting everything. Hidden cameras would be installed in the main villa. Financial notices would be timed to arrive during his romantic weekend. Every lie would be recorded, every boast catalogued, until Sebastian had created enough evidence to bury himself. We'll need the paper trail perfect, Matthew said, already typing instructions to his legal team. When this ends, I want him to understand that stealing from a Caldwell has consequences. As plans solidified around me, I walked out to Matthew's private beach, needing air that didn't taste of revenge. The sand was cold under my bare feet, waves delivering their eternal rhythm against the shore. I called Marcus, my only friend who'd stuck around through the Sebastian years, needing someone to tell me I wasn't becoming the monster I was fighting. You're not seeking revenge, Marcus said after I'd explained everything. You're seeking restoration. There's a difference between destroying someone for satisfaction and stopping someone from continuing to destroy you. From the terrace I could see Matthew watching me, and in his posture I recognized something familiar. He'd been protecting this family's legacy his entire life, making hard decisions that kept the Caldwell name strong. My mother, his sister, had been the gentle one, the one who chose love over logic. She died when I was 15, leaving me caught between 2 worlds. Matthew's pragmatism and her romanticism. I'd chosen her path with Sebastian, and it had led me here, broken and preparing for war. When I returned to the study, Matthew handed me a folder. Inside were documents I didn't expect. Transfer papers for a small investment account he'd maintained in my name since my mother's death, untouched and growing for over a decade. Your mother made me promise to give this to you when you were ready to build something of your own, he said quietly. I think that time has come. But first we deal with Sebastian. The trap was set. Solara Island's staff had been briefed. The cameras were being installed. Financial notices were being prepared for strategic delivery. Sebastian thought he was taking his mistress to paradise, but he was actually walking into a carefully constructed theater where his performance would be his undoing. I stayed at Matthew's estate that night, sleeping in my old room for the first time in 7 years. The ceiling still had the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck there as a child, their faint light a reminder of dreams I'd once had before Sebastian rewrote them. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Tonight I finally understood that justice wasn't about becoming like Sebastian. It was about becoming who I should have been all along. Someone who refused to let lies stand as truth. The next morning brought news through Matthew's network. Sebastian's helicopter had departed from Whitmore Airfield at 10, carrying him and Ella toward what he believed would be his greatest performance yet. I watched from Matthew's study as he showed me the live satellite feed of Solara Island, a private indulgence he'd installed years ago to monitor his investment. The helicopter appeared as a small speck against the azure water, approaching paradise with no idea it was actually approaching judgment. The staff had been thoroughly briefed by Matthew's estate manager, Patricia, a woman who'd worked for the Caldwell family for 20 years and understood the delicate balance between service and surveillance. Every employee on the island, from the dock hands to the housekeeping staff, wore tiny earpieces connected to a central communication system. They would play their parts perfectly, treating Sebastian like the owner he pretended to be while recording every boastful claim and fraudulent statement. When the helicopter touched down on Solara Island's helipad at noon, the scene was orchestrated beautifully. 3 staff members in crisp white uniforms stood waiting with champagne on silver trays, addressing Sebastian as Mr. Sebastian with practiced deference. Through the hidden cameras, I watched him straighten his shoulders, his entire posture changing as he absorbed their attention. Ella emerged from the helicopter like she was stepping onto a red carpet, her sundress billowing in the ocean breeze, her face glowing with the satisfaction of someone who believed she'd finally found her prince. "Welcome to your island paradise," the senior staff member said, his face neutral despite knowing the truth. Sebastian accepted the champagne with a proprietary air, gesturing broadly at the landscape as if he'd personally carved it from the ocean. "Isn't it magnificent?" he said to Ella, loud enough for the cameras to capture clearly. "I've owned this place for 3 years now. Been waiting for the right moment to share it with someone special." Matthew, sitting beside me, made a note in his legal pad. Every lie was being documented, time-stamped, and would eventually be presented as evidence. The federal charges for fraud would be substantial, but it was the personal humiliation that would destroy Sebastian completely. The villa tour began at 2 in the afternoon. Sebastian walked through the main house with exaggerated familiarity, making up stories about renovations he'd supposedly overseen, furniture he'd allegedly imported from Italy, art pieces he claimed to have personally selected. Ella absorbed it all, occasionally running her fingers along surfaces with an acquisitive touch that made my skin crawl. She was already imagining herself as mistress of this domain. Then came the first crack. At the Island Boutique, a small shop that sold luxury items to guests, Sebastian selected a designer watch for himself and a gold necklace for Ella. When he handed over his credit card with casual arrogance, the machine declined. The staff member ran it again with the same result. I watched Sebastian's face flush as he fumbled for another card, muttering about technical difficulties with his bank. "These offshore accounts," he said to Ella with forced laughter. "Sometimes the international transactions get flagged. I'll have my accountant sort it out." But his accountant wasn't answering calls. Through the surveillance feed, we could see Sebastian stepping away repeatedly to check his phone, each unanswered call adding another layer of panic to his features. Matthew had timed everything perfectly. The banks had been notified of suspicious activity. Credit lines had been frozen pending investigation. The financial house of cards was beginning to tremble. Dinner that evening was served on the beach, tiki torches creating circles of golden light against the darkening sky. The table was set with Caldwell family china, the crest clearly visible on each piece. I watched Ella's fingers trace the elaborate C on her wine glass, her expression thoughtful. "This crest is everywhere," she observed, her voice carrying perfectly to the hidden microphones. "Even carved into those trees that must be hundreds of years old. Tell me again how you acquired this place." Sebastian launched into an elaborate fiction about shell companies and trust funds, international negotiations and private deals. The more he talked, the more fantastical his story became. The cameras captured every bead of sweat on his forehead, every nervous gesture as he wove lies so complex even he seemed to lose track of them. My family had connections with the Caldwells, he said at one point, and I felt Matthew tense beside me. We go way back. They needed liquidity, I had capital, and the island changed hands very quietly. Very few people know the real story. Ella nodded, but something in her eyes had shifted. She was too smart to fully believe him, but too invested in the fantasy to challenge it directly. Instead, she asked seemingly innocent questions that forced Sebastian to dig his hole deeper with each answer. After dinner, they walked along the beach, and for a moment, watching them through the cameras, I felt a strange pang. Not jealousy exactly, but a recognition of what I'd once wanted with Sebastian. Those easy, intimate moments, the shared dreams, the promise of a future together. But that Sebastian had never existed. The man on the screen was who he'd always been, someone who built castles in the air and expected others to pay the mortgage. As night fell over Solara Island, Matthew's security team implemented the next phase. Door codes were changed remotely. Boat access was restricted. The helicopter pilot was instructed to develop mechanical issues that would delay any departure. Sebastian and Ella were effectively trapped in paradise, though they wouldn't realize it until they tried to leave. In the master suite, Sebastian finally stopped checking his phone and focused on Ella, playing the part of the confident owner to the end. Through the night vision cameras, we could see them on the terrace, champagne glasses in hand, looking out over an ocean that didn't belong to him toward a future that would never exist. Matthew closed his laptop and looked at me with something between sympathy and satisfaction. We had documented enough fraud in one day to ensure serious legal consequences, but the real destruction would come tomorrow when Sebastian's carefully constructed identity collapsed entirely. I felt no pleasure in watching him sleep peacefully in luxury he couldn't afford, beside a woman who would soon see him for exactly what he was. This wasn't about enjoyment. It was about balance, about the universe correcting itself after years of allowing lies to flourish at truth's expense. Morning arrived at Solara Island with a spectacular sunrise that Sebastian would never appreciate. I watched through the surveillance feed as he jolted awake at 7, his phone vibrating violently on the nightstand. The screen showed 17 missed calls from his lawyer, Bradley Morton, a man who'd helped Sebastian navigate the gray areas of financial law for years. This time, Bradley wasn't calling to help. Sebastian stumbled onto the terrace, pressing the phone to his ear while Ella floated in the infinity pool below, her morning swim a picture of serenity that contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding above her. Through the hidden microphones, we could hear Bradley's voice, high and strained. "They've frozen everything, Sebastian. Every account. The properties you listed as collateral? The bank knows you don't own them. They're calling in all the loans immediately. We're talking about criminal fraud charges here." Sebastian's free hand gripped the terrace railing so hard his knuckles went white. He tried to keep his voice low, but panic made him careless. "That's impossible. Those accounts have been active for years. This is just a misunderstanding." From the pool, Ella had stopped swimming. She floated on her back, seemingly relaxed, but her eyes tracked Sebastian's pacing with the focus of a predator sensing weakness. When he ended the call and tried another number, then another, each going unanswered, she gracefully exited the pool and wrapped herself in a silk robe. "Problems, darling?" she called up, her tone light but probing. "Just some banking confusion," Sebastian replied, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "International holdings can be complex. Nothing to worry about." The morning supply boat arrived at 9, carrying provisions and one unexpected passenger. James Rodriguez had been a bartender at the Marina District Club where Sebastian held court every Friday night, buying rounds with my money while regaling anyone who'd listen with tales of his business victories. Matthew's team had tracked James down and offered him a free day trip to Solara Island in exchange for his presence. He didn't know the full plan, but he didn't need to. James encountered Ella at the breakfast pavilion while Sebastian remained in the villa, frantically attempting to access accounts that no longer responded to his passwords. The bartender's natural chattiness did the rest. "Mrs. Ella, right?" James said with friendly recognition. "I've seen you with Mr. Sebastian at the club. He's quite the storyteller." Ella's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched slightly. "Oh, what kind of stories?" "The best kind," James laughed, helping himself to fresh fruit from the buffet. "Just last month he was telling everyone about how he convinced his ex-girlfriend to fund his entire business venture. Said she was so naive she'd sign anything he put in front of her. Or I think her name was Sweet woman used to pick him up when he was too drunk to drive. Haven't seen her lately though. The color drained from Ella's face so gradually it was like watching a sunset in reverse. He said she was his ex-girlfriend? Well, that's what he called her last month. Though funny thing, she was still living with him then, far as I knew. Maybe they broke up recently. James shrugged, oblivious to the damage his casual words were causing. He always said she was too clingy, too desperate. But between you and me, she seemed like the only real thing in his life. Everything else was just talk. Ella excused herself with icy politeness and walked back toward the villa with measured steps. Through the cameras, I watched her enter the living room where Sebastian was still on his phone, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the air conditioning. At exactly noon, Matthew activated the next phase. The villa's entertainment system, a massive screen that dominated the living room's western wall, flickered to life. Sebastian and Ella both turned toward it, and there I was, sitting in Matthew's study, looking directly into the camera with calm determination. "Hello, Sebastian," my recorded voice filled the room. "By now you've discovered that your accounts are frozen and your fictional empire is crumbling. I want you to understand that this isn't about revenge. It's about truth." I watched their faces through the surveillance feed as my message continued. Sebastian's expression cycled through shock, rage, and fear, while Ella's features hardened into something resembling carved marble. "For 5 years I worked double shifts at Marina's diner to fund your dreams. Every business lunch, every suit, every country club membership came from my exhaustion. I co-signed loans believing we were building a future together. You built your reputation on my sacrifices while telling people I was your charity case, your burden, your naive ex-girlfriend who couldn't let go." The presentation I'd prepared with Matthew's team began displaying on screen. Bank statements showing my transfers to Sebastian's accounts. Photos of receipts for purchases he'd claimed as his own investments. Legal documents with my signature supporting his ventures. The properties you claim to own belong to the Caldwell family. The businesses you boast about have failed or never existed. Even now, you're standing in my Uncle Matthew Caldwell's family estate, pretending it's yours. Every lie you've told has been documented. Every fraud recorded. Ella stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She walked past Sebastian without looking at him and headed toward the guest bedroom. He followed, his voice rising with desperate explanations that contradicted themselves with every sentence. "Ella, please, this is all a misunderstanding. Aurora is just bitter about our breakup. The island situation is complicated, there are partnerships involved." The guest bedroom door closed in his face with a decisive click. The sound of the lock engaging was audible even through the surveillance equipment. Sebastian pounded on the door, his carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. "Elle, you have to listen to me. Yes, I may have exaggerated some things, but the feelings are real. We have something special." From behind the door, Ella's voice was arctic. "I'm calling my sister's yacht. Don't follow me, Sebastian. Whatever game you've been playing, I'm no longer interested in being a participant." Through the window cameras, we watched Sebastian stumble back onto the terrace, his phone dead in his hand, his designer clothes wrinkled and stained with perspiration. He sat on a lounger and put his head in his hands, finally alone with the truth of what he'd built. Nothing. An empire of air, supported by the woman he'd dismissed as desperate and naive. The afternoon sun beat down on Solara Island, and Sebastian sat motionless as paradise transformed into a beautiful prison. Inside the guest bedroom, Ella made her calls with clinical efficiency, arranging her exit from a story she'd never wanted to be part of. The man she'd thought was a prince had turned out to be something far more common. A liar living on borrowed everything, including time. The sun began its descent toward the horizon at 4:30, painting Solara Island in shades of gold and amber that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. Sebastian remained on the terrace, staring at nothing, while Ella had barricaded herself in the guest bedroom for the past 4 hours. Through the surveillance feeds, I watched him attempt to compose himself several times, straightening his wrinkled shirt and running fingers through disheveled hair, only to slump back into despair when reality reasserted itself. Then the boats appeared. 3 vessels cutting through the golden waters with purposeful precision, their timing calculated to arrive just as Ella's sister's yacht appeared on the opposite horizon. Matthew had orchestrated this moment like a conductor preparing for the finale of a symphony. The lead boat carried Matthew himself, his silver hair catching the light as he stood at the bow, watching his island grow larger with each passing moment. Behind him, his legal team sat with briefcases that contained Sebastian's complete undoing. The third boat held additional security personnel, though they would prove unnecessary. Ella emerged from the guest bedroom at the sound of approaching engines, her luggage already packed, her makeup flawless despite the day's revelations. She moved through the villa with the detached efficiency of someone erasing their presence from a place they wished they had never been. Sebastian scrambled to his feet when he saw her, but she held up one manicured hand to stop him from speaking. The boats reached the dock simultaneously with Ella's escape vessel, but Matthew's security chief radioed the yacht captain with clear instructions. No departures until Mr. Caldwell had concluded his business. The yacht idled 50 yards offshore, close enough for Ella to see salvation, far enough to ensure she would witness what came next. Matthew entered the villa like he owned it, which of course he did. His presence filled the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with authority earned through decades of building an empire on solid foundations rather than borrowed dreams. His legal team followed, transforming the great room into an impromptu courtroom where Sebastian would stand trial for his deceptions. Mr. Reeves, Matthew's lawyer Harrison Pike, addressed Sebastian with the kind of formal courtesy that preceded legal devastation. We need to discuss several matters of urgent importance regarding your activities over the past 3 years. Sebastian attempted to summon his usual charm, the smooth confidence that had carried him through countless situations where truth became negotiable. Mr. Caldwell, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Aurora and I had a business arrangement. She was fully aware of all our ventures. Matthew remained silent, his gray eyes fixed on Sebastian with an intensity that made the younger man take an involuntary step backward. Harrison opened his briefcase and began laying documents across the coffee table with methodical precision. Each page represented another thread in the web Sebastian had woven, now being used to entangle him completely. Loan application from March, claiming partnership with Caldwell Enterprises, Harrison read aloud. Forged signature on a guarantee for a $100,000 credit line. Wire transfers from Aurora Chen's personal accounts totaling $212,000 over 36 months. Business proposals using Solara Island as collateral for development projects. Ella had positioned herself near the windows, close enough to hear everything but far enough to establish her separation from Sebastian's crimes. Her expression revealed nothing, though I noticed her fingers tightening on her designer purse with each revelation. Sebastian's composure cracked further with every document Harrison produced. His hands shook as he attempted to explain, to contextualize, to minimize. These were joint decisions. Aurora knew what she was signing. She wanted to support my success because she believed we would share it together. That was when Matthew nodded to his assistant, who connected a tablet to the villa's sound system. Sebastian's own voice filled the room, captured from the previous evening's dinner conversation with Ella. His words, spoken with wine-fueled arrogance, echoed off the walls with damning clarity. Aurora was the perfect mark, his recorded voice boasted. So desperate for love she would have signed over her organs if I'd asked. The woman worked herself to death thinking she was building our future while I was building my exit strategy. 3 years of her paying for everything while I established myself. She never even questioned where the money went. The recording continued, each word another nail in the coffin of Sebastian's fabricated identity. Ella's face had gone pale, though whether from disgust at Sebastian or recognition of her own near escape from becoming his next victim remained unclear. Sebastian lunged for the tablet, but security stepped forward, blocking his path without touching him. He stood there, trapped between his own words and the future they had destroyed, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Matthew finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of controlled fury. You took advantage of my niece's trust and generosity. You used my family name to commit fraud. You claimed ownership of property that has been in my family for generations. These are not misunderstandings, Mr. Reeves. These are crimes. Harrison presented 2 final documents with surgical precision. The first was a permanent injunction barring Sebastian from all Caldwell properties and any use of the Caldwell name in business dealings. The second was a civil suit that would strip him of every asset gained through fraudulent means, with criminal charges to follow pending the district attorney's review. Sebastian's legs seemed to give out. He collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands, the image of complete defeat. That was when I stepped through the doorway, having taken the boat with Matthew but remaining out of sight until this moment. Our eyes met across the room and I saw recognition dawn on his face. Not just that I was there but that I had orchestrated everything. The surveillance, the documentation, the timing of each revelation. The woman he had dismissed as desperate and naive had constructed his downfall with meticulous precision. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply stood there, my dignity intact, watching him understand that every sacrifice I had made had been catalogued, every lie he had told had been recorded, every dollar he had stolen had been traced. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything that needed to be said but never would be. Ella moved past us all without acknowledgement, her heels clicking against the marble floor with finality. She paused at the door just long enough to address Sebastian one final time. Whatever we might have had was built on lies. I suppose I should thank Aurora for revealing the truth before I wasted more than a weekend on you. The security team escorted her to the waiting yacht, which departed immediately, carrying away Sebastian's last hope of maintaining any piece of his fabricated life. The sun continued its descent, casting longer shadows across the villa where Sebastian sat surrounded by the wreckage of his deceptions. The security team moved with practiced efficiency, not rough but undeniably firm as they guided Sebastian from the villa toward the dock. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds, and that was when the island staff began their final performance. From various entrances around the villa, employees emerged carrying boxes, each one bearing a label written in Matthew's precise handwriting. Rolex Submariner. Purchase date January 15th. American Express card registered to Aurora Chin, read the first label. Italian leather shoes, 3 pairs, MasterCard Aurora Chin March through May. Each box represented another theft, another betrayal transformed into material evidence. The staff placed them in neat rows along the path to the dock, creating a gauntlet of Sebastian's crimes that he would have to walk past. Matthew had hired 2 photographers from a legitimate news agency, professionals who specialized in corporate fraud cases. They documented everything with clinical detachment, their cameras capturing Sebastian's progression from the villa to his judgment. For someone who had spent 3 years crafting a false image, being photographed in his complete destruction was perhaps the cruelest punishment of all. His shoulders hunched forward as he tried to shield his face, but there was nowhere to hide on the open path. Near the dock, Ella's yacht had pulled alongside to allow her to disembark one final time. She stood at the gangway in a different outfit than she'd worn earlier, having changed into something severe and black, as if she were already dressed for the funeral of their relationship. When Sebastian saw her, he straightened slightly, perhaps hoping for some final word of understanding or forgiveness. Instead, Ella's voice cut through the evening air with the precision of a surgeon's blade. You should know, Sebastian, that I started having doubts 3 weeks ago. The stories weren't adding up. The math didn't work. I hired my own investigator last Tuesday. She paused, letting this information sink in. I was planning to leave you after this weekend anyway. Aurora simply saved me the trouble of crafting my own exit. Sebastian's mouth opened and closed without sound, resembling a fish pulled from water. Ella continued, her tone conversational despite the devastating content. The jewelry you gave me, the pieces you claimed were family heirlooms? I had them appraised. Purchased 6 months ago with credit cards that weren't yours. I'm keeping them as compensation for my wasted time and the embarrassment of being associated with you. She turned to me then, and for a moment her perfectly composed mask slipped. Thank you, she said simply. Your sacrifice wasn't entirely in vain. It prevented others from making the same mistake. With that, she returned to her yacht, which pulled away from the dock with engines that purred like satisfied cats. Sebastian watched her go, and I saw the exact moment he realized that even his appeal to women had been based on lies. Without the money, the properties, the false promise of luxury, he was just another mediocre man who thought he deserved more than he had earned. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small velvet box. Sebastian's eyes widened as he recognized it. Inside was his grandmother's ring, the one truly valuable thing he had owned before he met me. He had given it to me on our 2nd anniversary, back when I still believed his lies were dreams we were building together. Even after discovering his betrayal, even after learning about Ella, I had kept it safe. This belonged to your grandmother, I said, walking toward him with measured steps. You told me she was the only person who ever really believed in you. I don't know if that was true or just another story, but either way, this should stay in your family. I placed the box in his hand and he stared at it as if he couldn't quite process what was happening. Here I was, the woman he had systematically destroyed, showing more care for his family heritage than he had ever shown for my well-being. His fingers closed around the box and I saw his throat working as he struggled with words that wouldn't come. Why? He finally managed to ask. Because I'm not you, I replied simply. I don't take things that aren't mine. I don't destroy what others hold precious. That's the difference between us, Sebastian. You thought my kindness was weakness, but it was actually strength. The strength to remain human even when you tried to break me. The sound of boat engines interrupted whatever response he might have made. The police vessel approached the dock with steady purpose, carrying officers from the mainland who had warrants based on the evidence Matthew's team had compiled. 2 officers disembarked first, their expressions professionally neutral as they approached Sebastian with handcuffs. Sebastian Reeves, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they read him his rights, Sebastian looked at me one last time. His eyes, which I had once found so charming, were now desperate and hollow. Aurora, I did love you once. In the beginning, before everything got complicated. That was real. I met his gaze steadily, feeling neither anger nor pity, just a vast tiredness that seemed to settle into my bones. Love doesn't steal someone's future, Sebastian. Love doesn't drain someone dry and call them desperate for giving everything. Love doesn't lie about who they are while taking credit for someone else's sacrifice. Whatever you felt in the beginning, it wasn't love. It was opportunity. The officers guided him onto the police boat, his hands now cuffed in front of him. The photographers captured these final moments, the sunset providing dramatically appropriate lighting for the end of Sebastian's fabricated empire. As the boat pulled away from the dock, I noticed he was still clutching his grandmother's ring box, the only real thing he had left. Matthew placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle but grounding. You did well, Aurora. Your mother would be proud of how you handled this. I watched the police boat shrink into the distance, carrying away 5 years of my life in the form of a man I had never really known. The sun touched the horizon, setting fire to the clouds in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for such an ugly day. Around us, the island staff began cleaning up the boxes of evidence, returning Solara Island to its pristine state, as if Sebastian had never existed here at all. The morning would bring lawyers and paperwork, recovered assets, and new beginnings. There would be testimony to give and documents to sign. But for now, I stood on my uncle's dock watching the last light of day fade from the sky, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. The kind that comes not from revenge or vindication, but from finally letting go of a weight you didn't realize you had been carrying until it was gone. The first morning in my apartment without Sebastian's presence felt like breathing after being underwater for 5 years. Sunlight streamed through windows I had forgotten could be clean, illuminating the small space that suddenly seemed twice its size without his belongings crowding every surface. My phone, which had been silent for months except for his demands, now buzzed with life. 23 messages waited for me, each one from someone I had lost touch with during the Sebastian years. Former colleagues from the marketing firm where I had worked before taking extra shifts at the diner reached out with variations of the same sentiment. They had heard about what happened and wanted me to know that positions were available if I wanted to return. Sarah, my old supervisor, wrote simply, "We always knew you were worth more than he let you believe. Your desk is waiting if you want it." The messages continued. Friends I had cancelled plans with too many times, always because Sebastian needed something, wrote to say they understood now why I had disappeared. My college roommate, whom Sebastian had called a bad influence because she questioned his treatment of me, offered her spare room if I needed space to figure out my next steps. Each message was a thread reconnecting me to a life I had abandoned, proving that some bridges, though neglected, had never truly burned. 3 days later, Matthew asked me to meet him at Marina's diner. The request felt deliberate, bringing everything full circle to where my story had begun and nearly ended. Marina herself was working the morning shift, her weathered face breaking into the first genuine smile I had seen from her in years when I walked through the door. "Coffee's on me today, honey," she said, pouring a cup without waiting for my order. "Every day if you want. You've paid enough in this life. Matthew arrived precisely at 9, looking somewhat out of place in his tailored suit among the fishermen and dock workers who comprised the morning regulars. He ordered black coffee and got straight to the point, as was his way. "I've been thinking about what happened," he began, his gray eyes focused on mine. "Not just to you, but how many women go through similar situations. Financial abuse is rarely recognized until the damage is complete. The victims are left not just emotionally broken but economically destroyed, with no resources to rebuild." He pulled out a folder, sliding it across the worn Formica table. Inside were incorporation documents for the Caldwell Foundation for Economic Recovery, specifically designed to help women rebuilding after financial exploitation. The mission statement was clear: provide emergency funds, legal assistance, and job training for those whose economic lives had been deliberately sabotaged by partners or family members. "I need someone to run it," Matthew continued. "Someone who understands not just the numbers but the psychology, the shame, the difficulty of asking for help when you've been conditioned to give everything away. I can't think of anyone more qualified than you." Marina, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop while wiping down the nearby counter, suddenly spoke up. "I want in. First donation right here." She pulled $500 bills from her apron pocket, money I recognized as her emergency fund kept hidden in the register. "I've watched too many women sit at that counter," she nodded toward where I had spent countless late nights, counting change while their men spent freely. "It's time someone did something about it." Her declaration opened a floodgate. The fishermen at table 3, who had silently watched my decline over the years, pledged a monthly contribution. The morning cook offered to provide free meals for women using the foundation's services. Within 10 minutes, Marina's diner had become the unofficial headquarters of something larger than any of us had imagined. 6 months passed in a blur of establishing the foundation, helping our first clients, and slowly reconstructing my own life. I had moved to a better apartment, one where the locks worked and the windows opened. My position at the foundation provided not just income but purpose, transforming my pain into something that could prevent others from experiencing the same. Then the letter arrived, expensive stationery with a return address I did not recognize. Inside, Ella's handwriting was as precise as her appearance had been. "Aurora, I owe you more than gratitude, though I offer that as well. Enclosed is a check for $37,000, the amount Sebastian admitted spending on gifts for me using your funds. I've since married someone who values honesty above image, partly because your actions taught me to recognize the difference. I've also started volunteering with women's financial literacy programs. Your story, though Sebastian never meant for me to learn it, changed my perspective on strength and sacrifice. You saved me from years of deception, but more importantly, you showed me that survival can become transformation. With respect, Ella Morrison, formerly Lancaster." The check was real, though I would donate most of it to the foundation. What mattered more was the confirmation that ripples from that weekend on Solara Island continued spreading, affecting lives in ways I had never anticipated. 1 year after Sebastian's arrest, Matthew invited me back to Solara Island for a Caldwell family reunion. Standing on the helipad where I had once watched Sebastian claim ownership of something that was never his, I now watched my younger cousins build elaborate sandcastles on the beach below. They called me Aunt Aurora, having heard stories of my work with the foundation, looking at me with admiration rather than pity. The island had been transformed in my mind from a crime scene to a place of reunion. The villa where Sebastian had performed his final act now hosted family dinners where my story was told not as tragedy but as triumph. The dining room where his lies had been exposed now echoed with genuine laughter. Matthew joined me on the helipad, both of us watching the sun set over the same waters that had witnessed Sebastian's downfall. "You know," he said quietly, "revenge was never really the goal, was it?" I considered this, feeling the warm breeze that carried no ghosts, no anger, no regret. "No," I replied. "It was about truth. About refusing to let someone rewrite my story while I was still living it." The foundation had helped 43 women in its first year. I had returned to school to complete my abandoned finance degree. The apartment I had once shared with Sebastian had been replaced by a home that was entirely mine. The woman who had once served coffee with shaking hands now stood on solid ground, surrounded by family who had never truly left, just waited patiently for my return. The island stretched before us, no longer a symbol of deception but of recovery, of family, of the truth that ultimately refuses to stay buried, no matter how deep the lies. If this story of calculated revenge and ultimate redemption kept you hooked until the end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Aurora returned Sebastian's grandmother's ring, showing more humanity than he ever displayed. What was your most satisfying moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories of betrayal and triumph. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.